Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren. I'm helping out with the Youth Forum. I'm here to introduce Susan Strauss, who is an eco-storyteller. What a rare breed, but so needed in this time. Susan is going to take us on a journey. So we've been busy with our minds, listening to so many amazing speakers for the last 2 days. And now we are going to incorporate our hearts and take a deep dive into the story of ecological civilization, right? Because if we're truly going to shift the paradigm from the mechanistic story to the story of ecological civilization, right, we need to create the words, we need to articulate this well. And Susan is going to take us on that journey. But this is only half of it. The second half is in the workshop in room 109, Carnegie 109, and that is where you get to participate in creating the story. Okay, so get ready to take a deep dive into your hearts, into your deep sensing, your deep listening, and co-creating the story of ecological civilization. Susan.
So what I'm hoping, I'm hoping that so I was a very poor reader as a child. I didn't learn to read until 5th grade. I had a Dutch grandfather who was a wild man, who was lied about his age and joined the Dutch Navy at a young age and had tattoos up and down his arms before it was a popular thing to do. And he told wild stories about being chased by sharks in the Havana harbor. And then I grew up with German grandparents who were the only ones of the Strauss family who escaped Nazi Germany as Jews. And I grew up looking at family photographs and learning the stories of the people who never came out of Germany. So I woke up to the world through my ears instead of through reading. And so what I'm hoping to do with you today is to I'm very ambitious. I want to at once to open up to you the great variety, what I call the species list of stories, the great variety of types of stories that are at your beck and call as an educator, as a speaker in conversation, in every aspect of your work in promoting what we all want to have happen. And at the same time, I've been listening to you for several days, and I want to try to unify many pieces of what I've been hearing, and really helping you to understand how story can be of service to you. A friend of mine used to say, after she discovered, listened to me telling stories, she said, you know, I think that storytelling is the most eloquent way that human beings have for speaking with each other. And so, of course, every religious tradition, every cultural tradition in the world has a story tradition. And in many places, it has been wiped out, or it's been crushed, or it's been ignored. And this is time for us. So what are we doing with this art now in this modern time? And the third thing I really want you to be asking yourself is, what is it that story does? I want you to have an analytical thinking also about it, but how does story do? What is the quality, the nature, the characteristic of this particular communication creature? How does it do its work? So in light of those three things, I want to begin, I would like to begin with a personal story. And I don't want to remain in personal story land, because I think, as Lauren said, people can become very myopic in their own personal stories. But realize that if you're going to become an elder, or maybe you're already an elder, and how does one become an elder, is that you have a lot of experience. So sometimes when I've done workshops for people in the National Park Service, I say to them, the average American is spending, what is it, something like 36 hours a week, maybe more now, watching television. And we are living in this age of distraction, right, as we all know. And you, I say, you have been spending those 36 hours observing bears or wolves or how a river moves. And so you have a lot of experience. How to transform that experience, how to shape it, how to form it so it becomes a meaningful story. And that's where you take your personal and you make it into something archaic. I mean, in archai, in archai. I mean, the word archai is so beautiful. I mean, when we say archetype, right? You're reaching into your personal story to try to find what is archetypal, what feeds the public, what feeds humanity through your personal experience. So not that I'm going to say this is a brilliant story. I'm always fishing for stories in my life. I'm always looking for them, and you should be doing the same. I encourage you to do the same. And that's what the workshop is for later today. And I'll take a moment here to advertise. That's what this mailing list is for. If you want to give me your email list, I will let you know about kind of ongoing Zoom classes I do to try to coach people in developing a story, sort of like just a community book group, you could say. So, so let's just take this story. And I'll just jump into it as if I were just talking to you, just in conversation, and then notice how it gets formed a little bit. So I live in a desert. I live in Central Oregon. It's high desert. We get about 7 inches of rain a year. And my husband and I, we built a house, and the builder of the house didn't do it quite right, so that the house was built too low in the land. And so we had to dig this ditch around the front of the house so that when it did rain, there would be some way for the rain to run off. And of course, that was pretty ugly. So eventually we made it into a kind of a fake stream, with lined plastic and boulders and rocks. And well, you would step out the front door into a pond. That was not so good either. So in those early days of our house, I had the front door open all the time because where there's water, there's life. And our son Lucas, was about 2 or 3 years old then, and he was attracted to that water. And so I was nervous. I kept the door open. I'd be doing the dishes. And one day I heard Lucas say, "Mom." "Yes, Lucas?" "I see the ant, Mom." "Good, good, honey, good." "Mom." "Yeah, honey." "I see the ant, Mom." That's great. That's great, dear." "Mom." "What, Lucas?" "I touched the ant, Mom." That's how life began at this little fake pond out of our front door. And then there were all kinds of creatures, little boatmen who were doing little backstrokes across the water. And my children are always out there seeing what insects they could catch in this fake pond. And then one evening coming home, it was as if God said, "Let there be light." And someone flipped a light switch, and there was an entire rock band of frogs singing in the pond. And of course, then there were tadpoles. It begs the question, well, where did these frogs come from? How did they know to come there? And who came first, the tadpole or the frogs? And my children were out there with their things, apparatus, catching the tadpoles and the frogs. And then we lived with this pond for a while. I remember in the winter when the ice would crust up against the stones, and there'd be a little bit of water that had melted by the edge of the stone, and the juncos would come down and sip a little bit of water there, and noticed many different kinds of birds that were attracted there, how much birds need water. And then it was one season, I remember it was pure royalty that showed up at the pond. When I say royalty, I mean the prince of nature, the predator. My kids were screaming, "Mom, I've got to come downstairs. There's a rattlesnake at the pond." And when I came downstairs, it was just a little 6-inch garter snake that was coiled up on itself as if it was saying, 5-alarm fire, 5-alarm fire. And then a couple days later, "Mom, no, it's really a rattlesnake now. It's really a rattlesnake." And then I saw this mother garter snake who was swimming through the pond. She had just eaten a half frog, half tadpole, where its tail and its feet were sticking out of her mouth. She had a very guilty look. And then, of course, that's anthropomorphic, but and then she looked both ways, and then she just slithered through the water and disappeared into the flower bed. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, even a pond has a story, because where there's water, there's life. Okay, so there you see this. Now, I've told this story to children, and it's really a very important child story. I'll ask them to raise their hand. How many of you have a pond you love to go to? And they will very proudly, they have a pond they go to, you know. And others sort of sheepishly not being able to raise their hand, like they're missing out on something big. So anyway, okay, so what I'd like you to do is take a moment, and you can write this or you can think about it. I would love you, first of all, is to write what for you was the strongest image from the story I just told. What picture? I love to use the word image, but in vernacular, what is the picture that stayed with you? What's the first thing that came to your mind? What was that picture that came to you? You can write that down, or you can just raise your hand and tell me. Let me hear a few. Yes, Jay. The snake with the frog in the mouth. The open door. Oh, nice. Mm-hmm.
Snake swimming.
Snake swimming. Yeah. Yeah.
The royal.
Okay, good. So now I like you to then write down, is there a hook phrase, a moment when you found yourself thinking, your mind was wandering about, the dishes that you left in the sink, and then all of a sudden I said something and you said, "Oh, I want to know more about that." Can you think of a moment in the story when something hooked you? Anyone? Yeah.
Yep. By the tale that the builder had not done suitable assessment of drainage.
Perfect.
It was a distraction. I was still wondering, and your story drifted off in another direction, but that clean well, let that go.
All right. So great. If you don't mind, let me just jump onto that, because, Mark Twain, I don't know if everyone knows here who Mark Twain was. I think Americans mostly know who Mark Twain, but from China, Mark Twain was a very important first American early American writer who wrote about slavery, who made slavery a literary issue. And he wonderfully said that if there were no mistakes, there would be no stories. And I love to think about that because a lot of times, there was a person who worked for the Park Service years ago, used to say, to make a compelling story, there must be conflict. And I object to that statement, especially in a world where we have plenty of conflict. Is everybody tired of it yet? You know, I'll just say this other little story of years ago, I was an artist in schools in a very poor section of Central Oregon in a place called Lapine. And I worked for about 2 weeks with children, and we just had a little stone in the center of the room. And I said, what makes a story worth listening to? That was my question to them. And and if they had a story worth listening to, they picked up the stone and they told it. The first day, we sat in silence. Nobody said anything. Second day, they started picking up the stone. And every story they told was violent. About someone being killed, someone being run over, someone shooting a bear, all violent. And we went through about maybe, I was determined in that workshop with those children to allow listening to be the powerful force. So I wasn't going to interrupt this, say, well, but it was interesting. After about 2 or 3 days, they just became tired of telling stories of violence. And I said, okay, so when there's conflict or violence, that is interesting. Hollywood does a lot with that. But does it become boring after a while? And so with it, well, I point that out when you say that there was something that went wrong, right? The builder did something wrong. And then that starts. So really, we don't have to have conflict. We can have something that is contrasting. You have a brand new house and it's not built quite right. That's a contrast. And that is like a form of hooking and engaging. Okay, let me ask you a third question. So we have strongest picture, and we can say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? We say that. So one of the first things that storytelling does is it translates information into picture. All of the great traditional mythic stories have powerful pictures in them. If I say to you Cinderella, looking at a you know, I guess I could say something different in China, but maybe not. We all know Cinderella. There's different versions of Cinderella around the world. And what comes to mind is the glass slipper, often is a strong picture. And then what is a hook phrase? Where does the story go into contrast where we become more engaged? What engages? That's a question. I don't have the complete answer to that, but always asking what is engaging and what is contrasting in the story that keeps us engaged. And then the third question I want to ask you is, where is there a sound effect? What sound effect that echoed in you that you remember? Tell me a few sound effect, or we could say somebody speaks something. If I were writing this story, I would put it in quotes. Who is speaking? Who is speaking? Again, if we look at the old stories like Cinderella, am I thinking Cinderella? No, Snow White. Let's take Snow White. Mirror, mirror, looking glass upon the wall. Who is the fairest of us all? We remember that. In the old fairy tales, there's not a lot of speech, very little speech, but the speech is important. So what in that story of the pond echoes in your ears? Yes. Yeah, good. Good, thank you. I mean, I could say others. Is there anyone is dying to say something? Yes.
The answer to that question was close to the same answer for the second question, and it was, Mom, there's really a rattlesnake. And it connected for me personally with the moment 40 years ago when I literally had a rattlesnake in the crawl space under my house. So it took me back there as well.
Yes, 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 yes. So this is also makes another point about storytelling is that, you know, I love this modern phrase, you hear it again and again, is control the narrative. You know what I mean? When you, yeah, or they need to get out in front of the narrative, right? And competing narratives. It just makes me sick to my stomach as a storyteller to hear those phrases. I mean, I understand it. So this also brings us to the question about how is storytelling different than propaganda? Because propaganda is also uses a lot, and marketing uses a lot of these qualities of storytelling. But for me, of course, the true storytelling enables the audience is free. There are multiple experiences of um, of the story that people have, and yet there's also similarities. If I go to any audience, I especially try out my stories on fourth graders. I love fourth and fifth graders, and if you try out a story on them, if you ask them for what's the strongest picture in the story, oh gosh, maybe half of them or 2/3 of them will have the same answer. And then maybe another third will have a different answer. But you can start to find out by asking these questions of any audience, what is sticking with the audience from your story? And you can start to feel your way into what makes your personal story a universal story in that way. Okay, so let me leave this here for a moment. And just thinking of my time. So in preparing to come to this conference, I somehow got surfing YouTube one afternoon, and I discovered an interview with a famous person named Naomi Klein. I don't know if you know who Naomi Klein is. And I've heard of her many times. She's an eco-civ person like us. She's written many books. I think she's a director of a center on climate change at the University of British Columbia. And she was being interviewed with a woman filmmaker. I can't remember her name, but they were being interviewed about this. What was shocking to me to hear was that the billionaire class in our country and in the world is really has sort of given up on our world. We heard about this from Jeremy Wendt, this idea that they've given up and that they're going to colonize Mars, or they're going to colonize Greenland, or they're going to build themselves their own little place where only the rich and the clever can live, and the rest of us poor folk are just going to have to suffer to the end of the world. And she was describing this and saying they're not climate deniers. They understand that climate is what's happening, the climate destruction is what's happening. And so in the midst of this, the interviewer asks Naomi, so what is the counter narrative? I said, oh, that's interesting. What is the counter narrative? She said, well, the counter narrative, of course, is that we must be devoted to our planet. We must love our planet, and we must be connected to community. Many of the things have been spoken about in this conference. And then the interviewer asks, and do you have a story for that narrative? And there was this very uncomfortable silence in which both Naomi and the filmmaker didn't actually have a story. So they could talk about a narrative, but they didn't have a story. And I thought to myself, I'm going to this conference. I have some stories. And so I thought very carefully, and I asked my husband too, what do you think are the best stories that I have for the future vision of our beautiful planet? And so I want to give you those 3 stories in this time that I have with you. And so I'm going to speed up. You see, I started with personal story, and now I'm going to jump into the realm of traditional story. And you can see these same three elements in this, where as I said, information is translated into picture, where there is some sort of contrast that creates consciousness, that creates interest, that is engaging, and there is something which is a sound effect or spoken, becomes auditory. So I want you to pay attention to those three ideas, because in my book, The Passionate Fact, what I came to realize is that I say, and I write about it in the book, that storytelling is a three-part art. It is a literary art because it creates meaning, but it is not literature, which means written. It is spoken, but it creates meaning. That's narrative, we can say, how the narrative moves. It is also then a visual art because it must create picture. And you could say that in every traditional story, there are 3 to 5 powerful pictures that carry the narrative line, that help move the narrative line on its journey. I should say that that journey experience, and that what I would call narrative, is also what gives us a experience of meaning. We go on a journey. Even a simple question which yearns for an answer, the scientific process, is a story form, is a narrative form. And it is also a musical art because the spoken character voices, the sound effect of the wind, the way in which life becomes experience again in the story is what wakes up our ears, wakes up our feeling, as Lauren was saying, wakes up our heart. So we know that we can take experience and make it into a story, form it into a story. And when we tell a mythic story, we are trying to revitalize the experience in the symbolic realm, in the mysterious realm of symbolic story, whether it's parable or folk tale or fairy tale or myth. What is called now traditional story, because the word myth has been used so poorly. But we want to invigorate the experience of nature through making our language musical and making the pictures powerful. So I want you to take that. How storytelling does its work is through this three-part art. All right, having said that, I want to enter into this creation story from the Zuni native peoples of the American Southwest. What we can say about the Zuni, one thing we can say about them as a people, is that they live in desert country. They have always lived, their country, their home is desert. And they are also farmers in a desert landscape. This story was collected by a man named Frank Cushing, who in the 1870s, very interesting, his biography, his story, very interesting, connected with the Zuni. He grew up in Pennsylvania, and he was a sickly child, and so he never went to school. He never went to school. He hung out in nature most of his childhood. And later he went with John Wesley Powell down the Colorado River, and was invited by Powell to go and do an expedition to the Zuni and to record their stories for the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian in those days. And they say about Frank Cushing is that he went wild. He was adopted by the Zuni. He was given a name, and he lived with them. And there's some other complications to his story as to why he then left. So that's where I found this text for this story. It is the Zuni Bible, and I'm only going to tell you maybe the first page of maybe what was, almost a quarter inch of Xeroxed paper. And I tell this story in honor of the picture that was shown by Jeremy Went, the beautiful picture of our Earth, the beautiful blue ball floating in space. So maybe you can start with holding that picture in your mind before I enter into the story.
In the dark, vast, void spaces of Hona Wilona, the Creator, gathered all thought in the universe into himself. Ahona Wilona gathered all thought from across the vastness of space, gathering it all into himself, gathering it toward himself until he burst, he birthed, he exploded as our sun, and send his thoughts out in the universe as light. He saw the earth near him. She, the mother earth, she was churning, turning, and his thought was gathering all manner of mists, waters pouring down, filling the earth mother, she churning, turning in amongst these rolling, rocking ocean waves. And the Sun Father looked at the Earth Mother, so beautiful she was. But he fell in love with her. He sent his love as light. Through the darkness of space, he sent his love as light to touch her, to penetrate her waters. And lo, from the love of light and water, a green substance, a silky green substance slipped out over the surfaces of the mother's waters. She enveloped her rocky body with this cloak of green, and she lay back in her waters, and she looked up at the Sun Father, knowing that all life on earth would be born out of this green cloak. All plant, human, animal life would be born. She asked Father this question. She said, yes, but how will our children know their place as home? And as she asked that question, she lifted up some of her waters into her hand.
And her hand, it held those waters as a small pool. Her fingers made a rim rock cliff on the edge of that pool. And with her other hand, she stirred in the water, stirred the water so that there was a bit of foam on the surface of the water. And then with her breath, she blew that little bit of foam and it lifted up as a cloud above that pool. And the Sun Father, he sent his warm breath and dispersed that cloud into a mist. And the mother, she laughed. She said, so it will be that when clouds lift up from the great waters at the boundaries of my lands, when those clouds lift up, they will be borne about by both our breaths, warm and cool. And then when they become so full that they shed down as great sheets of rain, I will gather those waters, those sweet waters, in the crevices and holes of my rocky body. There, our children will know their place as home. Not you alone, Simba. Not you alone will nourish our children. Then on a great beam of light, a great hand reaching out to the earth, he dropped there in that pool 7 seed grains of grass. Can you imagine in this early dawning of the world, in the first light, the dawning of the world, there in this pool, this clear, sweet, beautiful water, you could see right through it, there to the bottom, where these 7 seed grains of grass gleamed by like pieces of gold. The mother, she moved herself ever so slightly, and her body cracked open. She swallowed the 7 seed grains of grass, Sun Father, down, 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 into the first womb world. Now, I'm going to stop the story here. And because he posed this amazing story, the Zuni have 5 womb worlds. And the first human beings are described as little beings slithering about in the mud. And the grasses sprout and grow up to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and into this world, which is the 5th womb world. It's an incredible story of evolution. There are dinosaurs in it, and they carry the seed grass as they evolve into larger creatures who come up into this 5th world. And many cannot bear to live in the light, and they slither into low, dark places, while others learn how to stand upright in the light. And eventually they travel and become people who are carrying the magical seed of rain and dew, and those who carry the precious the seed, the offspring of the 7 seed blades, seed of grass. And from that, the great ceremony happens, and they give birth to corn. And corn is made sacred, and there's this wonderful proclamation, and there do you to do not change the nature of its being, lest you go looking for it in hunger. I think about GMOs, and all. So it's beautiful anyway. So that I want to give you that. It's such a beautiful, what I love so much about earliest mythic stories is, of course, photosynthesis is an act of love in this story. And how much do we think about that when we walk out in the day and be grateful for the plants and for this act that happens between water and plants and the sun. Yeah. Or do we think of our world as a womb? We're living in a womb. All right, that's my first, that would be one story I would tell, Naomi. All right, let me go right away. I wanted to say one thing, and then let me go right away to two more stories. You know, in my book, I'm very proud of this one chapter because when I first wrote the book, the man who was editing it kept on, who asked me to write the book, said, well, you know, stories create messages, they create morals, they create meaning, they come to a point. And so I created a chapter that said, the moral to the story and other false ideas about what storytelling is. Because I feel like it's almost not a point to be, I mean, a story always comes to some point or some message, often does. But sometimes, I go, what is the message about Zeus and chasing around always at nymphs and cheating on his wife? You know, what's the point of that? But it's more that it's the experience that story creates an experience in which our imagination is enriched. It's a little bit less controllable story. All right, let me give you this one. Here is the story. Again, I will go to other cultures, but let me give you this one from the Nez Perce of where I live in Oregon. The Ninepu, the Nez Perce, who were very heroic people in the history of the wars of the American government against Native people. And the Nez Perce held out for a very, very, very long time. And then, of course, it was one of the great battles, the tragic battles of that time. This is their creation story. So it's a coyote story. And I always think it's very interesting that at the time that America's policy was extermination of Native culture and Native peoples in the late 1800s, already in the 1850s and 60s, I think in the 1870s is when it was full-on war. There was also the birth of anthropology, the study of human culture. And so there were anthropologists running around collecting some of these stories. And this again is, there was one of the famous anthropologists was a Nez Perce who worked with Franz Boas, who was the father of anthropology. And his name was Archie Finney, and recorded the Nez Perce stories. It is a coyote story, and those of you who don't know much about coyote, I would just say coyote is the first thing that got me into storytelling. I was trained as an English teacher. Even though I was a terrible reader, I became an honors English major and a poetry major. I like poems that are short and easy to read. And I got hired by a traveling outdoor school in Portland, Oregon. So this suburban girl from Northern Virginia goes out west to Portland, Oregon, and goes with this traveling outdoor school that was created by a geology professor from Princeton, who discovered his students learned more when he had them outside. And his girlfriend, who was a history major, they created this. There were 4 teachers, and we traveled for 6 weeks with teenagers and studied the history, natural history. And I was supposed to do something with Indians. And so I started reading, and the first story I ever bumped was all these coyote stories. Coyote and raccoon, coyote and this and that. Well, coyote is a trickster character, and in the Northwest, I would say a dominant trickster character of most Native tribes in North America. In the Northwest in particular, coyote
So as a trickster, Coyote is foolish, but also heroic. And so everything that we have to endure in life was created by Coyote, and everything that we have to appreciate in life was created by Coyote. So you'll see those elements in this story. Coyote is making his way, as the Nez Perce would say, Hitolaitsana, Itsiaya. He was going on his way. Coyote, Hitolaitsana, Itsiaya. That's Coyote. Itsiaya. And he was making his tracks, and he was traveling far up along the Columbia River. He was building the stones so that the salmon would have to swim up river. And as he was busy building this, for soon the human beings would be coming, the two-leggeds would be coming. I'm talking about this time, this long ago time when there were only animal people. And as he was busy working, he stepped on Meadowlark and broke her leg. And Meadowlark, she flew up into a tree and she said, "Oh, Coyote, 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 you're so stupid, Coyote. You do not even know there's a great big monster swallowing everything up. But I am making the world ready for the coming of the human beings. It would not be good to have a monster swallowing everything. You must tell me, sister, you must tell me, where is this monster?" "Oh, no," she said, "I will not tell you, I will not. Because if I tell you, Coyote, you will say, I already knew that. I just forgot about it." No, she would not tell him. And so Coyote, with the power of his imagination, he began to make out of a twig a new leg for her. And she liked her leg so much. That great monster is all the ways on the other side of the Cascade Mountains. Coyote said, "Big monster? That will be the only place he could fit. I already knew this. I just forgot." Flew away, and Coyote was preparing for this monster. He made 5 obsidian knives and he threw them in his backpack, and he lassoed the 3 mountains. He lassoed the great mountains and he pulled himself up and he looked over the mountains, and there, way out in eastern Oregon and Washington and California, oh my, he saw this huge monster. And this monster was so big, his tail was whipping around in Canada, and his mouth, he was swallowing up things down in California. And this monster had this huge mouth, and when he would inhale, everything, trees, rocks, animals, everything would just swallow up in him. As this monster moved over the landscape, earth, lifeless. I know just what to do about a monster like this. I'm going to run away. And Coyote started. Then he thought this great spirit had given him the power to create whatever he could imagine. And he thought, no, I know, he thought. I'm going to make myself good enough to eat. Huh? And Coyote, he slipped into what's called Trillium Lake, and there he washed himself over, and he smelt himself good. And ha! Now I smell good enough to eat. Climbed up into the heather, and he shook the heather, and he called out, "Hey! I bet you can't swallow me. Great monster turned his head and he said, is that you, Coyote? Yeah, it is me, Coyote. I bet I can swallow you up. Monster laughed. When he laughed, the whole earth shook. Monster said, go ahead, try to swallow. Coyote took a big breath. And he took a big breath. Nothing moved. Maybe a hair or two on the top of it. That could have been the wind. Monster started to laugh. He said, now, Coyote, it is my turn. I'm gonna swallow you. And Coyote said, no way, no way. And he tied himself to a tree. No way, you can't swallow me. The monster was very determined and took a great big breath. And as he took this big breath, Coyote, the whole wind was whipping around the mountains, and Coyote was hanging on to this tree, and then that tree just snapped, and Coyote was flying across. He was flying all the ways across eastern Oregon, and as he was flying through the air, he was throwing out of his backpack huckleberries and pine nuts and saying, soon the human beings will be coming, and they will need to eat these things. And he was flying as he was going on his way, and just into the mouth once. Harvey. It was bones of the people who had died inside the monster. And there was rattlesnake. Coyote just skipped right on his head. He said, rattlesnake, if you are so much to be feared, how come you are inside of this monster? How come you didn't kill this monster? Down the throat of the monster. There in grizzly bear. Coyote popped him in the nose, flattened his nose right out. He said, grizzly bear, if you are so much to be feared, how come you didn't kill this monster? Then Coyote went down to the heart of the monster. There were still some people alive inside, but they were so thin, you could see through them. And Coyote took out his obsidian knife and he began to cut the fat from the heart of the monster. And he threw the fat to the people and said, sweeten your mouths with that. The people became stronger, fuller bodies. Then Coyote took out his fire drill. Little bit began to at the base of the heart, he began to make a little fire. Soon the flames of that fire were licking at the base of the heart of the monster. This is the monster. I should have known better than to swallow you, Coyote. Now I have heartburn. Monster begged Coyote to come out of his ears. Coyote said, I should come out of your ears? Then the people will call me earwax. Huh? No, I am Coyote. The fire began to grow and grow, and Coyote told all of the animals inside of the monster, gather up the bones of the ancestors, gather up the bones and bring them to the holes of the monster. And now the monster was in great pain, and he was begging Coyote to come out of his nose, to come out of his mouth. And Coyote said, no, then the people will call me snot. They will call me vomit. No, I am staying right here. And the fire in the heart was growing, and Coyote was cutting away at parts of the heart. And the monster was begging Coyote to come out of his rear end hole. Children love this part of the story. And so then Coyote said, no, no, then people, I will not be that. I will be called Coyote, the bringer of things in the world. And now the monster was almost dead. And Coyote told all of the animals, push all of the bones of the people who have died inside of this monster, push them out. When the monster dies, all of his holes will open up and we will be free. And sure enough, the monster, when he finally died, lay there, all the people popped out. And Coyote was busy cutting the monster up into big pieces. And everywhere he threw a piece of the monster's flesh, there human beings sprang to life. And he would name them. They threw it here and said, you Shoshone, you Walla Walla, you Bannock, you Palouse, you Spokane. And so he threw out flesh in every direction. Wasco. And as he was throwing the flesh everywhere and the people were coming up, Fox, his younger brother, came to him and said, hey, Coyote, what about the people who are right here? And Coyote said, I knew this. I knew I had to make people right. I knew this, I just forgot. And so what did Coyote do? He took all of the bones of the people who had died inside of that monster, and there he took the heart of the monster and squished the blood from that heart. And then that blood fell on those bones, and those bones sprang to life as people. Coyote said, you, Nez Perce, you may be a little skinnier because I have deprived you, but you will be a people always with a very big heart. And then the storyteller said, that is how Coyote created our people. And then he said, it's a very good thing I am doing. And he went on his way, making his trip. Our time is getting short. Can I keep going?
We're actually into break time.
We are. Oh dear. Oh dear. Shoot.
Do the rest of the workshop.
I thought I had until 10:30. Well, I want to invite you very much to come to the workshop because I have a Japanese story that is one of my favorite stories that I would like to share with you also. Hopefully you'll come to that. And that is what I call it birds of fortune, but it's often in books, it's referred to as the Kikimimi Zuki. It means the listening cat, the small listening cat. It's a beautiful story about listening and about healing through listening. And if you have to leave, I wanted to say to you, I don't produce CDs anymore. I brought with me 2 different kinds of CDs and the story of the Birds of Fortune is on the Birds of Fortune CD. And I'm giving these away so you can take them. I feel like they have, these 2 CDs have collections of mythic stories, traditional stories, as well as personal stories. And so it's a good variety of stories for you to listen to different types and different ways of telling stories. So I wanted to offer that to you to take one, take them all, please. I don't want to take any home. And then, but I am selling my books, and I'll just say quickly,
this is my passion in fact, which is all about using storytelling in the teaching of science, the interpreting of science and natural history, and this is my most recent book, which I'm very proud of because it's 12 myths from around the world about plants. And my colleague, Dr. Ian Edwards, who used to be the director of public engagement at Edinburgh Botanical Gardens, wrote the botanical wisdom that's alluded to in every myth. So you see a myth, let's say from Nigeria, followed by the botany, as according to Dr. Edwards. And then after that, the editor asked me, I wrote a little bit about how I developed the story, how I think about the storytelling of that story. So it's educational for you to think about how to tell stories as well. It also contains in it some poems, a beautiful piece from Shakespeare, and just an honoring of plants in the book. And I'll just say one last thing. Currently I have a little group going of people. I just recently did some work with people in river restoration work, and I'm wanting to collaborate and put a book together on water myths with scientific stories. Okay, that's it for now.